People don't always hate you because of something you did. In fact, the most unsettling kind of rejection comes when you did nothing at all.
No conflict.
No insult. No betrayal. Nothing you can point to. Yet the tension is there. You enter a space and feel it immediately, before a word is spoken. Before logic has time to intervene. A subtle withdrawal. Eyes that don't quite meet yours. A shift in tone that no one acknowledges, yet everyone feels. An invisible resistance, quiet but unmistakable. You're included, but not welcomed. Heard, but not received. Present, but somehow treated as an interruption rather than a participant. And eventually the question forms in your mind, slowly, cautiously, almost apologetically. Why do some people dislike me for no reason? This question haunts thoughtful people more than careless ones, because thoughtful people turn inward first. They replay conversations in their mind. They examine their words. They reread messages. They ask themselves if they were too quiet, or too confident, or too distant, or too present. They search for a mistake that explains the discomfort. Careless people assume the world is wrong. Thoughtful people assume they might be. And that is why this experience cuts deeper for those with awareness. But the truth behind this kind of rejection is uncomfortable. And uncomfortable truths are often avoided, softened, or denied. Most rejection has very little to do with behavior. It has everything to do with reflection. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology gave it language. They observed human behavior without sentimentality, without illusion. Marcus Aurelius wrote his reflections not to impress others, but to remind himself of a brutal truth. People act from their inner state, not from objective reality. Centuries later, Carl Jung would give this inner mechanism a name: projection. Projection is what happens when the mind refuses to confront something within itself and instead assigns it to someone else. People do not respond to who you are. They respond to what your presence awakens in them. This is a hard sentence to accept because it removes the illusion of control. If rejection were about behavior, you could fix it. If it were about words, you could refine them. If it were about manners, you could improve them. But when rejection is about reflection, there is nothing to correct. And once you truly understand this, something inside you begins to settle. You stop shrinking yourself to be digestible. You stop explaining yourself to be accepted. You stop trying to manage other people's emotional reactions. You begin to stand differently. Not louder, not aggressively, but more firmly within yourself. Let's begin at the root. Every human being carries an inner contradiction. There is the version of themselves they present to the world. The acceptable version. The polished version. The version shaped by social rules, family expectations, and survival instincts. And then there is the version they hide. The version that feels envy but pretends not to. The version that feels fear but performs confidence. The version that longs for discipline but remains stuck in comfort. The version that senses its own unrealized potential and resents reminders of it. Jung called this hidden part the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is simply unacknowledged. And what is unacknowledged does not disappear. It waits. It waits for a mirror. And when someone walks into the room carrying qualities the shadow has rejected, the reaction is immediate. If you are calm, you confront their chaos. If you are self-contained, you confront their dependency. If you are disciplined, you confront their excuses. If you are at peace, you confront their inner conflict. You don't say a word. You don't accuse them. You don't judge them. But your presence does something far more disturbing. It reveals. And the human ego does not like being revealed. So the mind protects itself. Instead of saying, I feel inadequate, it says, I don't like you. Instead of admitting, I feel threatened, it decides, you're arrogant. Instead of acknowledging, you remind me of what I avoid, it concludes, there's something off about you. This is not conscious cruelty. It is unconscious defense. The Stoics warned that people are not disturbed by things, but by the meanings they assign to them. You become a meaning.
A symbol.
Not of who you are, but of what they cannot face. This is why you can be disliked without ever doing harm. This is why kindness does not always protect you, This is why silence can provoke hostility. Calm people are especially unsettling to restless minds. Chaos recognizes chaos, but calm exposes it. If you don't gossip, some people feel exposed around you. If you don't complain, some people feel judged by their own negativity. If you don't seek validation, some people feel unnecessary. Not because you intend this, but because you do not participate in the emotional economy they depend on. Many social environments are built on shared insecurity, shared complaining, shared fear, shared dissatisfaction. When you opt out, even quietly, you disrupt the unspoken agreement. You are no longer confirming their worldview, and that absence feels like rejection, even when you never rejected them. Social psychology calls this status dissonance. Your inner stability destabilizes people whose sense of worth depends on external comparison. You don't dominate them. You don't submit to them. You simply exist without permission. And for some, that is intolerable. This is where many people misunderstand the situation. They assume dislike means they should change. So they soften their boundaries. They dilute their presence. They explain themselves preemptively. They try to be more agreeable. But the Stoics would call this a mistake. Because explanation is not always clarity. Often it is surrender. When you explain yourself to someone who is projecting, you are not resolving misunderstanding. You are validating their illusion. Epictetus warned that if someone is determined to misunderstand you, no explanation will ever be enough. And the more you try, the smaller you feel. There is a quiet strength in restraint, in choosing not to correct every assumption, in refusing to chase approval, in letting others sit with their discomfort. This does not mean becoming cold. It means becoming grounded. There is also a paradox you must accept if you want peace. The traits that make some people dislike you are the same traits that make others deeply respect you. Clarity attracts clarity. Stability attracts stability. Self-trust attracts those who value depth. You cannot be magnetic and neutral at the same time. Trying to be universally liked is a form of self-erasure. The Stoics did not aim to be admired. They aimed to live in accordance with their nature. And living in alignment always creates contrast. So when you feel that quiet resistance, that unspoken dislike, pause before turning inward with blame. Ask a different question. Not, what did I do wrong? But, what might my presence be reflecting? Because often, the discomfort has nothing to do with you, and everything to do with what you represent. And once you see that clearly, you stop bending. You stand.
Calm.
Upright, unmoved. Not because you are superior, but because you are no longer negotiating your existence. And that, whether people admit it or not, is power. Jung called this hidden part the shadow. The shadow is made of traits we were taught were unacceptable. Weakness,
Fear.
envy, anger, even confidence in some cases. When a person refuses to confront their shadow, it doesn't disappear. It looks outward. It scans the environment for someone who embodies what they suppress. And when it finds that person, the reaction is rarely admiration. It's irritation, suspicion, dislike. Not because you are wrong, but because you are revealing. If you are calm, you expose their inner chaos. If you are disciplined, you expose their lack of self-control. If you are confident without noise, you expose their dependency on validation. And the mind does not like exposure, so it protects itself the only way it knows how, by blaming you. Instead of saying, I feel inadequate, the mind says, you're arrogant. Instead of admitting, I feel insecure, it decides, you think you're better than everyone. This is not hatred born of logic. It is defense born of discomfort. Marcus Aurelius captured this perfectly when he wrote that people are disturbed not by events, but by their judgments about them. Your presence becomes an event. Their judgment becomes the disturbance. This is why explaining yourself rarely helps, because you are not addressing a misunderstanding. You are confronting a defense mechanism, and defense mechanisms do not respond to reason. Now here is something few people tell you. Calm people are deeply unsettling to unstable minds. Chaos recognizes chaos, but calm exposes it. If you do not gossip, if you do not complain, If you do not constantly assert yourself, some people feel small around you. Not because you make them small, but because you do not participate in the games that make them feel large. There is a quiet authority that comes from self-containment. You don't rush to speak. You don't chase agreement. You don't defend your worth. And this kind of presence disrupts fragile social hierarchies. Social psychology calls this status dissonance. Your inner stability destabilizes people who rely on external validation to feel secure. You are not trying to dominate, but you are not submitting either. That middle ground self-possession is rare, and rarity always creates polarization. Some will respect it instantly. Others will resent it silently. Epictetus warned that if you wish to be invincible, you must make yourself immune to provocation. Why? Because many people unconsciously test you. They test whether they can pull you into reaction. They test whether they can make you explain yourself. They test whether they can disturb your emotional balance. If you react emotionally, they relax. You're familiar. You're controllable.
You're safe.
But if you remain centered, something happens. They feel exposed. Your stillness highlights their restlessness. Your composure reveals their impulsiveness. Your boundaries reflect their lack of self-discipline. And exposure feels like judgment, even when no judgment is present. This is why calm people are often labeled cold. Why disciplined people are labeled rigid. Why quiet confidence is mistaken for arrogance. It's easier to label than to reflect. Now let's talk about confidence, real confidence. There is a kind of confidence that asks for permission, that announces itself, that demands acknowledgement. That confidence is fragile, but there is another kind. The kind that does not negotiate its worth, the kind that does not seek approval, the kind that does not need to be seen to be real. This is self-trust, and self-trust is threatening to people who survive on comparison, because comparison requires participation. When you opt out, the system breaks. You no longer compete, you no longer explain, you no longer seek reassurance, and people who rely on subtle dependency feel abandoned, even if you never left. This is one of the hardest truths to accept. Some people don't hate you. They hate the version of themselves they become around you. Now here is where many self-aware people make a critical mistake. They over-explain. They sense tension and try to fix it. They soften their words. They justify their actions. They try to be understood. But the Stoics warned against this. Never explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. Explanation invites debate. Debate invites control. Your life does not require consensus. Your values do not require majority approval. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not weakness. It is clarity. You are not responsible for regulating other people's projections. There is also a paradox you must accept if you want peace. The same traits that make some people dislike you are the exact traits that make others deeply drawn to you. Boundaries, clarity, emotional restraint, inner authority. You cannot have universal admiration without self-betrayal. Trying to be liked by everyone is a quiet form of violence against yourself. The Stoics did not aim to be admired. They aimed to be aligned, and alignment always polarizes. So how do you respond? You don't confront. You don't retreat. You don't perform. You observe. You detach. You continue. Marcus Aurelius said to waste no more time arguing what a good person should be, just be one. Consistency is the loudest answer. Composure is the clearest message. Time reveals what arguments never can. Eventually, something settles. You realize that when people dislike you for no reason, it often means you are living ahead of them internally. Not superior, just further along, and distance feels like judgment to those not ready to walk. Do not dim yourself to make others comfortable. You are not here to be digestible. You are here to be real. And when you stop asking, why do they hate me? And start asking, why am I still explaining myself? Everything changes. You stand upright. You remain calm. You become unreachable. That is not arrogance. That is not coldness. That is Stoic power, and it needs no approval to exist. So now you see it more clearly. Not every cold look is judgment. Not every distance is rejection. Not every silence is about you. Sometimes what people call dislike is simply the discomfort of being confronted by something they are not ready to face. Your calm, your boundaries, your self-respect, your refusal to perform for approval. These things do not shout. They do not announce themselves, but they echo loudly in minds that are already unsettled. And here is the quiet realization that changes everything. You were never meant to be universally accepted. Nature itself does not work that way. Some environments nourish growth, others resist it. A strong tree does not apologize for its roots disturbing the soil. It does not shrink to make the ground comfortable. It grows. The Stoics never asked, "Why don't they like me?" They asked, "Am I living in accordance with my values?" That question requires courage, because once you answer it honestly, you can no longer betray yourself for comfort. You begin to understand that rejection is often a sign of alignment. That resistance is sometimes proof of direction. That silence from others can be confirmation, not condemnation. And this does not make you harsh. It makes you precise. You learn when to speak, when to observe, when to walk away without resentment. You stop demanding that everyone understand you, because you finally understand yourself. And there is peace in that, a deep, grounded peace that does not rise or fall with opinions. People will still misunderstand you. Some will still feel uneasy around you. Some will still project their inner conflict onto your presence. But it no longer shakes you, because you recognize the pattern. You recognize that their reaction is information, not instruction. It tells you where they are, not where you should go. And perhaps the most important realization of all is this: you do not need to harden your heart to protect yourself. Stoicism is not emotional numbness. It is emotional sovereignty. You still feel. You still care. You simply choose not to be ruled by the unconscious reactions of others. That is the difference between strength and armor. Armor is worn out of fear. Strength comes from clarity. And clarity allows you to remain open without being exposed, present without being consumed, kind without being controlled. So if you've ever felt disliked for reasons you couldn't explain, let this truth settle slowly. You are not required to make yourself smaller to be acceptable. You are not required to explain your existence. You are not required to dim your awareness so others feel comfortable. Your responsibility is simpler and far more difficult. To remain honest, to remain grounded, to remain aligned, and that path will never be crowded. Now, if these ideas resonated with you, don't rush past that feeling. Sit with it. Reflection is not passive. It is an act of strength in a world addicted to distraction. If you want to continue exploring the psychology of human behavior, the quiet power of self-mastery, and the Stoic principles that help you move through the world without losing yourself, then stay here. Subscribe not for motivation, but for clarity, not for noise, but for depth. And if this message put words to something you felt but never fully understood, leave a comment, not to explain yourself, but to acknowledge your own awareness. Your presence here is enough. Walk calmly, stand firmly. And remember, you don't need to be liked to be grounded. You only need to be true.
Silence.
Let it end there.